Hey, Nurses on Fire. I am super honored to have LeShawnda Fitzgerald here from Online Spanish Challenge. Hey, LeShawnda, how are you?
Yeah, how are you? Excited to be here.
Thank you. I'm good. So, could you tell us, first of all, a little bit about your background on how you learn Spanish, how you learned to teach Spanish, and why you focus on teaching Spanish to medical professionals?
So I actually am not a native speaker. I took my first Spanish class when I was in the seventh grade, and it was just something that I was naturally good at. So I continued learning. I went to college, but I actually wasn't fluent in Spanish. I majored in Spanish in college, and then I got a job as a Spanish teacher, like a high school Spanish teacher. And that's when I really honed in on my skills. Just because a lot of the ways that people are taught Spanish don't really teach you how to speak. So that was kind of my issue, and then that was also the opportunity for me to overcome when I began to teach Spanish, because I don't want to teach like I've always been taught, and then other people have essentially just wasted all this time because they have a skill that they can't use. So I just little by little began developing a method to help people actually speak. So that's how I got here. I got laid off from my teaching job. So, like 2 years into teaching, it was kind of like what's going on now with the economy. So, like, teachers are home. Like, hopefully, teachers aren't getting fired, but the substitutes are already, kind of displaced, just due to what's going on. So, you would think that education was a solid career, but it wasn't. I was laid off, and I started my own business. Like, I started my own thing. So I started a Spanish program for kids, and then all of the adults were like, "No, I want to learn too." Like, so that's how I kind of started teaching adults, and then from there, healthcare was just the next logical step, was just to niche down so I could focus in on individual skills: Spanish for business, Spanish for healthcare. So my healthcare program specifically really took off, and that's how I'm here today. Um, well, there's a huge Hispanic and Latino population here in the US. And just the way that healthcare works, due to the demographics, especially in certain parts of the country, those patients are underserved, right? So they're a large community. They definitely need healthcare and have specific needs, but there are language barriers that are um, really dangerous. Like, healthcare workers depend on clear communication to assess patients. So when there's a language barrier or even a third party, that's just um, a huge liability, right?
Yeah, so I was going to tell you, like, why don't we just lean more on a third party interpreter versus, learning it ourselves?
So the thing is, a third party interpreter, even a family member who sometimes, Spanish speaking patients come in with a family member, they're just not that expert, right? So they don't have the medical background. Uh, Things still get lost in translation, right? So even with that, just having some sense of the language can still improve the quality of care that for the patient. So even a nurse or a healthcare provider speaking just a little Spanish, like showing, hey, I'm trying to communicate with you, I'm trying to understand you, that helps the patient even just feel more comfortable. So, like, that immediately improves the comfort, which correlates to the care of the patient. So it's just a small gesture, a seemingly small gesture that goes a long way in the care of this particular demographic of patients.
Okay. So, why do you think it's even more timely now that medical professionals learn Spanish?
Well, there are a couple of reasons. A, it's empowering for the healthcare professional. So, like, just for the healthcare professional, it's like, hey, I have these set of skills that set me apart. Like, I have these set of skills in addition to my medical training and background that just kind of makes me more personable. It makes me more marketable. Should I be on the search for another job? I haven't found that nurses who speak Spanish get paid more per se. So, like, I haven't found that yet. I think that's just because nurses in general aren't negotiating their contracts when they go in. So I think that if nurses felt more empowered, where, hey, I have these additional skills that I could negotiate, they would do that more. So that's the only reason why I feel like nurses aren't getting paid for those additional skills. But it does kind of put you on the front lines of getting hired. It does still set you apart, from, nurse B, C, D, E, F, G, who's applying for that same position.
Yeah. So right now, even though we're having a healthcare crisis, I think it's kind of ironic that a lot of nurses may be facing job loss during this time, or if they don't work in acute care settings, they're finding themselves either with their hours cut or just out of a job in general. So, um, can you talk about how important like building these skills are during these times?
Right. So, especially now, if you find yourself out of a job, if you are a bilingual nurse, you won't be out of a job long. You can literally put in or apply for a job anywhere and be employed very soon, just because there is such a need, especially now with everything that's going on with COVID-19. Um, Hospitals, the healthcare industry, it's a business. Like, yes, they're helping people, but it costs money to misdiagnose people or to um, just have things go wrong due to the translation. So I'm sure there aren't enough translators. Like, everything is understaffed. People, just from healthcare professionals that I've spoken with, it's that translator thing, it just hasn't been worked out yet, right? Like, it's hard. You got to call a number if you don't have a translator. And I'll translate too. It's still not a foolproof plan. Like, it still doesn't eliminate all the barriers. So just like empowering yourself with these extra skills. And here's the thing, you don't even have to be fluent in Spanish to take advantage of the opportunities. You can honestly just know a little. Like, on your resume, you can say, hey, I've taken a crash course in medical Spanish, right? And we do offer those, because I have like a 10-day class. You could say, hey, I've taken a crash medical Spanish course. And that's still going to position you ahead of other healthcare professionals who don't have any type of dual language background.
Yeah. And the thing is that it's really about patient care. I know that I'm a labor and delivery nurse, and when I can say certain terms in Spanish and make it just makes the patient so much more comfortable, and they trust me more. I can see their family relax. I can see them relax, and they kind of know I can kind of meet them where they're at. And so it builds that rapport. So even at the end of the day, if it's not about just increasing your revenue, it's really about that patient care experience, and it just knowing those few phrases really helps in that relationship and making sure that that patient trusts you and feels comfortable, because everybody that comes into the hospital, whether it's for having a baby, whether it's for being sick, it's uncomfortable. People feel vulnerable, and whatever you can do to ease that is going to help them heal and help them transition through whatever they're going through a lot easier. So, what are some common phrases? I know you're going to share some common phrases that every healthcare professional should know.
Okay, so the number one phrase that I think every healthcare professional should know is, do you need an interpreter? Okay, like that is the number one phrase. So I don't care if you are fluent in Spanish, if you just know a few phrases, and I'll teach you how to say it in a second. You don't want to violate the guidelines of your employer, right? So if you haven't gone through whatever process that is to say, no, you don't need an interpreter, you want to ask every single patient, do they need an interpreter, just to cover yourself, right? So we talked about empowering yourself. You don't want to be like a Spanish hero, right? You want to ask if they need an interpreter. Now, if they say no, carry on, right? But you do want to ask just to cover yourself. So, do you need an interpreter? Is necesita un intérprete, right? Do you need an interpreter? Necesita un intérprete. Now, interpreters get a bad rep, but here's why I love the interpreter, especially while you're learning, because the interpreter is the best teacher for you, right? Like you're in the healthcare setting, depending on what area you work in, it's 9 times out of 10 going to be the same Spanish all the time. Right? It's only gonna be, I'm gonna max it out 400 phrases or so. Like you're not gonna go outside of that. So if you start to work with that interpreter and really pay attention, you'll start to learn those phrases. So the interpreter is your friend. The interpreter is ultimately your teacher. So like, don't get frustrated with the interpreter. Don't get mad that it takes a long time. Use that as a time to learn. All right. So that's kind of like my key point.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I love like leaning on the interpreters to help you learn, as opposed to just looking at them as just a resource for your patients. They're also a resource for you. And yes, please love on and don't get frustrated with our interpreters, because my stepmom is actually a medical interpreter. She does Somali though, so I won't be learning Somali, but
I'm honestly, especially if you're learning on your own, like I have a really practical approach. It's just like, we apply what we learn right away. So it's not just, the girl, the boy. It's like, no, we got practical Spanish that I want you to implement right away the next time you go to work, right? So, and the interpreter will really help you. So follow along with the interpreter, jump in with the interpreter. Like now is your time
to practice. Yeah. Yeah.
And so I love the interpreter. It keeps everybody kind of under the guidelines. It protects you, and it's a great way to learn. So that's phrase number one. Necesita un intérprete.
Okay. You have more phrases?
Yeah. So what about what is the problem, right? So like, why are you here? Why are you here? So you can say tiene, which is, do you have? Tiene un problema, right? Tiene un problema,
Mm-hmm.
right? So do you have a problem? Like, I know it sounds crazy, but we kind of just want to.
Like, if like, do you got a problem? That's not for me. Like when I think about saying it, I'm like, oh, is that kind of antagonistic? Like, do you got a problem? But not the same.
From the patient, they really appreciate it, and I don't want to teach you something like that you don't have the skills.
Right. Uh-huh.
They may take that and run. So I tell nurses, healthcare professionals, to tell your patient to say yes, no, or I don't know, right?
Okay.
Because it's better if you can ask yes, and then you can, most Spanish speakers understand yes, no, or I don't know. But then it's sí, no, or no say, right? So I tell them to tell their patient to say yes, no, or I don't know,
Okay.
right? Okay, so we say diga, which is say, diga sí, no, o no sé, right?
Diga sí, no, or no say. Yeah, I like that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So ask yes, no questions to kind of eliminate it, and have them reply by saying yes, no, or I don't know.
Nice. Nice.
Right.
Okay.
So kind of just some things to start it. It's nice to, of course, introduce yourself. Tell them that you're learning
Mm-hmm.
Spanish. Like, hey, I'm learning Spanish. Um, aprendiendo español, right? Aprendiendo español. Estoy aprendiendo español. So just some of those little niceties. Do you need an interpreter? Hola, I am your doctor. I'm your nurse. I am learning Spanish, right? Do you need an interpreter? That will take you so far. So, soy nurse Fitzgerald. I'm not a nurse, but soy nurse Fitzgerald. Estoy aprendiendo español. Mucho gusto. Nice to meet you. Necesita un intérprete. Do you need an interpreter? That, if that's as far as you can go, that has made a world of difference for your patient.
Yes. Yes. I love it. Thanks for stringing that all together. And I think a lot of us could do that. All of us could do that now. Okay. So don't say I didn't teach you nothing. Just kidding. Anyway, how can people access your programs and your services? First, like what services do you provide for nurses and other healthcare professionals, and how can people access them?
So I have tons of resources for healthcare professionals. I have tons of free resources. I have paid resources that are very affordable for people who are really serious and want to take it to the next level. I do understand that people like to try things first, so I give a lot of my classes away. I just published a COVID-19 class. I shared that with nurses. So you can go to my website, onlinespanishchallenge.com. It's actually not on my website. So onlinespanishchallenge.com slash free medical Spanish is how you can get my just like a lot of my free resources. I send a free medical Spanish lesson out every Monday through email. So those are really practical step-by-step lessons. And then I have this study group with nurses that have just step-by-step lessons, simple daily lessons, weekly lessons, and there's a live teacher that comes each week that teaches you medical Spanish. So if you're consistent within a year, you can be fluent in Spanish and speaking right away at work. So like we don't play, we get you in there speaking, and that class is only $10 a month.
Wow. So all the links to the program will be in the show notes, so you guys don't have to worry about memorizing them. And I really hope that you guys take advantage of these resources. I mean, $10 a month is nothing to level up your career. And in general, I really feel like any skill set that you can have is just a valuable asset in life in general and for you professionally. So please take advantage of these resources, especially during these troubling times. So I want to thank LeShawnda for joining us on the Nurses on Fire podcast. And you guys make sure you connect with her over on online Spanish challenge.com, right?
Yes, onlinespanishchallenge.com. And I do just want to throw in there, like, nursing school is hard. Like, I'm not saying that nothing that I've done isn't hard, but pay attention to like what I do and how I do it in terms of like monetizing my exact skill. Because I took a language, something that people take for granted. English is not something that people take for granted. So any type of skill you can monetize, but especially even something as extensive as nursing. So I'm sure a lot of you all have skills. So if you do happen to like join my program or interact with it, just pay attention to the business side of it, to how I connect with people, how people ultimately pay me, just for this skill that I have. So I just wanted to throw that in there.
No, that's straight game. So you guys, LeShawnda is putting you up on game because we all have skills that we can monetize, even just as a labor and delivery nurse. If I have a course that just specifically teaches people how to interpret a fetal heart rate monitor, like that's it, so many new nurses or people that have been out of the workforce for a while need to know that it doesn't have to be, you don't have to teach people how to be a nurse. Just like LeShawnda was laid off from her job, she knew she could teach people how to speak Spanish and she monetized that. So this is straight game she's putting you on. Okay. If you have a skill, you can teach that, even if it's just one small thing. As a matter of fact, I would encourage you to just teach one thing and be known for that one thing, because that's what you can specifically target your audience and you can grow. So LeShawnda, she's first taught kids, and then the adults were looking out, were asking for it, and then healthcare professionals, it was obvious. So she took one small thing. She took her Spanish, she taught that to a group of people, a small group of people. And then from there, she was able to scale and grow. So yes, she is using this business, this one small skill set to grow and monetize and scale a large business, and we can all do that. So thank you for sharing that, because I think that that's super important, because sometimes especially nurses get stuck in this mindset that we're just a nurse and that we can only do what we're trained to do, because we get stuck in this rut. But we have skills on top of skills on top of skills that we can use and take them out of the healthcare setting and use them to grow and learn and build wealth for our families. So that is a super important thing to note. And a super important thing to close on is that we have the skills internally, even if it's just not learning Spanish. This is a new skill that I want you all to develop if you haven't already. But if it's not just that, we have so many other things that we can use to monetize. So, think about that for yourself. Like, what can you do? What skills do you know? What are you good at teaching other people when new nurses come? What are you good at teaching them? And then use that and grow. Like LeShawnda said, join her program, study her business model, and you could see how you can make it work for yourself. So again, thank you for sharing all the nuggets that you shared. Thank you for being here, and thank you for all that you do, because your role is super important.
Thank you for having me on. This was amazing.